Director of Public Communications and Public Affairs from the Ventura County Fire Department, Scott Thomsen, and his associate, Larry Parnell, the Associate Professor and Director of Strategic Public Relations Program at the Graduate School of Political Management. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here, Robert.
You know, I came across this stuff. I am always looking for great guests, and I came across this study haphazardly, and you had also emailed me in regards to this, and it's kind of funny. I found the study, and then I saw that you emailed me as potentially a guest to talk about this study. I'm like, what are the odds that that's going to happen? So I'm like, I got to get Scott on, and then you said Larry would be a great person to talk about this. So, God, I want to jump right into today's discussion, but I want to know about your background. So, Scott, why don't you talk about your background first?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the Ventura County Fire Department. I've been here about 3.5 years. Before that, I was doing similar roles for a publicly owned electric utility for about 14 years. And prior to that, I had 20 years in journalism. And throughout, in all of those roles, it's really been about keeping the public informed so that they can make good decisions, whether that's in their choices during elections or, whether it's making good choices now about how to be safe from wildfires and other things.
Real quickly, so people that may not understand where Ventura County is, where's it at? What's the population? And what's the personnel like for the fire department staffing wise?
So Ventura County is directly north of Los Angeles along the coast. There's about 1 million people total within the county. The fire department serves the entire county with the exception of the cities of Ventura, Oxnard, and Fillmore. We've got about 600 personnel total, and about 480 of those are directly firefighters.
Wow. Okay. All right, Larry, let's talk about you. Let's hear your background, man.
Well, I've been at GW in this role for about 16 years. Before that, as I like to tell my students, I work for a living. I was in communications, both corporate, nonprofit, and government. In fact, my second job, now I think about it, was as a public information officer for the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, which was a long time ago in another world. So when Scott told me it's a PIO podcast, I said, well, I'm down for that because these are my people. So yeah, I've been at GW now for about 16 years. We run a graduate program here in communications. And as of today, I'm actually stepping down in my full-time role and going to continue to be a professor at GW.
Excellent. All right, so you guys have like you both talked about some incredible credentials, and obviously you've got the background as public information officers as well as just great researchers, and that's what we're here to talk about. I want to talk about this study that you have on government communications that is now just in its second year, correct?
Right.
All right, so one of the key findings is that I saw in the study was that adults mistrust the government because they believe it's self-serving and they do not trust its messaging. Why is that the case when you guys were doing your research?
Well, I guess I'll get started with that. Just by way of background, we decided to do this study a couple of years ago. Scott and I were talking about how there's a continuous information about the decline in trust in government, increased pressure on the business community to step up and resolve and deal with social issues, the whole Edelman Trust Barometer. And I felt, and Scott agreed, that the government communications as a discipline was being underserved there, and asked why there wasn't any information on how government communicators could improve. Found out there wasn't, so we decided to do this study as a service to the members of Scott's organization as well as my students, who many of whom go into government communications when they leave GW. As far as the findings this year are concerned, they're really a continuation of the first year of the study. By way of quick background, we surveyed via email. We have a research affiliate that's a very high-end research shop out of New York that is run by an alum who donates their services to this effort, which we very much appreciate, a firm called Schoen Cooperman Research. And it's not surprising to us, and perhaps I'll defer to Scott on this as well, that there is not a lot of trust in what people hear from the government. What we really want to understand was what was behind that and how much of that was the responsibility of the government communicator and how much of that was just sort of generic. And so we did a little more parsing of that. And this year, the second year, we added the public to the study, essentially the customer, if you will, and asked them what their issues were. And they had similar responses. Sadly, the government communicators' confidence in their own ability to be successful declined year over year, which I think is part of just the wear and tear on them. I'll defer to Scott on the details of that, but I think what we're finding really is people don't understand the difference between political communications and government communications, and they kind of mistrust the whole thing. But Scott, what are your thoughts?
So first off, great partnership with GWU and the National Association of Government Communicators. When Larry brought this to me 3 or so years ago, I was immediately on board because of the importance of diving into this area, which is just foundational for what PIOs deal with every single day. And I'd point to a couple of pieces out of this just at the top level. The first is that we all kind of had a sense of, hey, there's some problems out here in terms of believability. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the divide that has popped up over the last 10 years in terms of conspiracy theories and who believes what. And when you start hearing things about alternative facts, you're in a bad space. I think that the change in PIO's perceptions of this may have kind of been influenced by the first year's results, because the first step in correcting a problem is recognizing that you have one. And I think that for a lot of folks, they'd been plugging away like, hey, we're the government, trust us. And that's not the environment that we're working in right now. We have to earn back some trust in a lot of areas. And that's what the survey at its top level is bringing forward.
So another key finding there, though, Robert, just to build on what Scott was saying, is the gap between the perception, even though we've got some realization setting in year over year among government communicators, when we added the public to this, that it's almost a mirror image. The government communicators feel that about approximately 50% of them are their trust levels are good, and it's almost the exact opposite in terms of the public saying we don't believe what we hear at the rate of 60%. So there is, to Scott's point, the first step is recognizing there's an issue, and the second thing is what do you do about it? And that's what we're going to focus on going forward.
Okay, so in regards to my next question, where I was going with this, and you kind of alluded at it, is because there's comms professionals right now look at misinformation and disinformation and political polarization as problems that harm the public trust, but they don't recognize that the government is having nefarious motives the same way U.S. adults do. Mm-hmm. So why do you think that makes, why there's that disconnect for the comms professional?
Well, I think there's been, let's be candid, there's been some weaponization of government communications that's gone on. Yes. In recent times at the federal level. By the way, we did parse it out, federal, state, and local. And the closer you get to the citizen, the better the level of confidence was in what they heard from the government. So part of it is that, the locals are more closer with their constituents than somebody who's a bureaucrat in the Department of Homeland Security or EPA. So that's a problem. I think that the challenge really is that the public has been credibility in government communications has been shaken by political misinformation, disinformation. But these are not things that government communicators can do much about. So what we really tried to focus on was, while this is happening up there at this level, the polarization of our country in general, what can we on a day-to-day basis do to improve our communications? And that's where we tried to focus. And that's where, because it's easy to say nobody trusts us because of whatever they've heard about COVID or the pandemic or any number of issues that the government's credibility has been shaken on in recent years. And I think that for communicators to just accept that is a mistake, and we're trying to help them move forward.
Yeah, real quick question. You brought up, hold on one second, Scott. You brought up the comment about COVID. And since this study was kind of in that time frame, shortly after COVID, we started to come out from COVID, do you think that had some impact on the government trust?
I do, absolutely. But I think for the reasons I mentioned before, the CDC and the FDA and organizations that we would normally just accept their word as straightforward and helpful became weaponized by differences of opinions, as Scott pointed to earlier, alternate facts about disease prevention and curing that really undermined a lot of things. And that, I think, is clearly a problem. But I don't believe we're in a situation there's no coming back for that. I do think we have to earn back the trust that, frankly, might have been taken away because we didn't really respond in the right way as communicators.
What I'd add there is that certainly there were some mistakes, especially early on during the pandemic, and that's not a surprise given that you're entering, a situation with no known history. You're trying to learn as you go, build the airplane while you're flying it. Failures to acknowledge what we didn't know at the time certainly came back to hurt them, in that way. And those are some things that we can learn from. But I agree fully with Larry that the short-term expediency that politicians will often put into trying to drive home some advantage at the cost of the long-term credibility of government organizations is clearly a piece of what is taking place. In our society, and that is more commonly happening at the federal level. As you get down to the closer that you get to local government, some of that goes away because literally those are the organizations that the folks who are in place are directly responsible for, and they don't have the ability to toss out outrageous statements about an agency without consequences because they're attached to it, and that certainly plays into it. But it does have a trickle down effect because the distrust seen at the highest levels gets lumped into trust in government as a whole, and that shows up consistently in the responses that we've been getting from the study.
Did you guys, when you were asking these questions, and I'm assuming it was email and click on
correct
answers and so on, was there a thought about you did public and private sector communications personnel, and I know that there's always this perception that the private sector does it always better than the public sector. They're paid better and so on. Did you find that the disparity was different between the two?
There's a slight difference, but not pronounced, between what we asked. There's three groups. One were government communicators, people like Scott. One were people who communicate with the government on behalf of their organization, nonprofits, corporates, etc., and the public. Between the communications practitioners in the two settings, government and private sector, some discrepancies between challenges and issues and ratings, but not substantial enough that I think there's a judgment attached to it. There are clearly differences in resources that are available to people in the private sector. We did have conversations in the first year, for example, about social media and use of social media, which by definition, resource-wise and otherwise, the private sector has more people to put on that kind of work than the government does. And there's also issues about the government being a late adopter and all those kind of issues. But I don't think there was as much of a discrepancy between what private sector communicators felt and what public sector communicators felt. The big gap was between the public, the customer, and the government, to the point Scott was making earlier, that there's just a lack of trust in the government created by all kinds of things, in many cases beyond the control of the individual communicator. And the closer you get to the citizen, the better, the narrower the gap was. But not a lot of judgment, Robert, in terms of private versus public sector. And I think that's frankly, an easy excuse that doesn't really doesn't make us decide to do better. We can say, well, they got more resources, and that's a mistake.
But also on the other side of it, from the public sector side, because the private sector has access to those resources, the public sector employee, if they don't have simple things like sentiment analysis software or software that picks up hashtags that are starting to pop up in your community, those search programs that are out there that they have to pay for, and a lot of agencies are like, I want free. All I want is free. I don't want to have to spend any money. you have zero budget as a public sector comms person.
Right.
That needs to go to the legislators in the agency or the finance person. They need to become aware that they're going to have to spend a little bit of money to be more effective.
I would, Scott, get your thoughts on this, but I don't think a lot of the readily available, useful tools social media makes available are that expensive per se. You can get a lot of stuff done. I'm sure in Scott's organization, they have some degree of monitoring and analytics. So frankly, I think sometimes that's a bit of an excuse that I think we have to be mindful not to hide behind and really face the fact that we could be doing a better job. And the question is how. Scott, you guys have access to social media enough to do a basic job, right?
Yeah. I think that what the results showed us was that, yes, there are some differences between how we operate and, as government communicators and how the private sector operates. Some of that is a bit of the bureaucracy, right? Like, there are higher, there are more layers of approvals. Your staffs are going to be smaller. You may not have the, latest, greatest platform to work with, but you've got something that you can do, right? Acknowledge the landscape, right? But in some of those pieces, it's like, well, I mean, that's just where we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't change the fact that we have an obligation to do, a good job with whatever tools that we have available to us and find answers to that. So working in this space, you may need to be more creative, more flexible, more nimble. You may have to do more than one thing, and you're not going to have an entire army to throw at it. Okay, that's the life of a government communicator. So let's get to work is the way that I look at that.
Right, I agree.
When you guys pose a question, ways to improve public trust in government messaging across all groups, found the disparities very interesting between what the public U.S. adults said, that 69% honesty and transparency, all comms said 24% transparency, all adults trust through actions, and then 15% for all comms, and then 19% said timeliness was important. I find these disparities extremely interesting. Why do you believe there's such a distance in the thought process of the comms profession?
Well, I think there's a number of things at play there. One is a mentality that, we're at a disadvantage and no one appreciates what we do. And you can kind of hide behind that and fall into that. And I think that's an issue. I think that you can be more nimble, you can be more responsive, and you can be more targeted in your communications without having to have an army of people to do it. I mean, the first year out, we got a lot of feedback on when we asked the question about an approach that would seem to be one size fits all communications from the government to the public, and the need for more targeting and more thoughtfulness. There's whole segments of the population, as you very well know, who don't read the daily media, don't watch the evening news. And if we're relying on them to put out news and information, and then you're saying, well, we're telling people, but the media is not covering it and they're not listening, that's not enough. I mean, you can't, that's a cop-out. So you have to figure out, it all comes down to really basic communications. Who's your audience? Where do they get the information? What do you want them to know? And what do you want them to do with that information once you get it to them? And if you're delivering information to a population via the local newspapers, which are shrinking, or the TV stations, which they're not watching, then you're not going to reach the people and they're going to think you're not transparent. But it's just because you're not talking to them where they are.
Right.
It's incumbent upon you as a communicator to figure that out and do that, rather than just say, I'm going to put out a press release and call it a day.
When I was with my original agency, I was in the Chicago metropolitan area, and the number 3 or number 4 in the nation for the market. I knew in the smaller agency that I was never getting a press release across to the local news media there. It was not going to channel, ABC, right. Fox, CBS. I always knew that if I needed to get something out to my public, I relied on platforms like Nextdoor, because I knew I had a good chunk of my public there. I knew that I could do things on our electronic signboard because the public that was driving through town could see it. And I relied heavily on pushing people to our website, because that's where we kept telling people, go here for information. This is where it's located. Mm-hmm. And that had we found that that's where most of our residents were happy to find stuff. And then, of course, as social media blew up, Twitter and Facebook became our primary avenues of talking to the public.
One other quick thought, and I want to get Scott's thoughts. That is, the survey we also asked this time around, the public doesn't trust the media either. So if you are doing a one-size-fits-all communications program using the media, and the public is telling you, I'm not getting it, and I don't trust the media, then you're putting your efforts in the wrong place. So you were right on target, what you were talking about before. I'm sure Scott's had this experience as well.
So Robert, what I'd point back to here is that a piece of this is for PIOs and communicators to be able to take an honest look at themselves, in the process of these results. And one piece of this, is that in the first year, we tended to see the pain points that they experience come forward as the out, right? And so that, you have to go through all of these extra layers of approvals as an example. And then, so timeliness, that timeliness must be one of the issues. Now, certainly timeliness, especially in crisis situations, is a critical function. You don't, if you don't get your message out there, someone else is going to fill that vacuum. But at the same time, is that the biggest, issue undercutting trust overall? Probably not. But you're seeing the pain points of the individual contributors to this, rising up as something, that they feel every day, and then they're going to focus on what their experience is. My hope is that by looking at the results from the other segments of folks that responded to the survey, we start to open our eyes to a few of the other areas that we need to be looking at along the way.
And so as you guys go into year 3, what's your focus point now?
Well, we're just having some initial conversations about that. We certainly want to continue to dive deeper into what are the barriers to trust and how individuals may be able to resolve those beyond what we've learned in the first 2 years. I also think at the federal level, we'll also we'll probably do the study after the election. And then it's going to be more about what's ahead and what are you going to do? And who knows at this point what the hell that's going to be. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But, I think the trust, I'd also like to explore more about the notion of the closer you are to the customer, the better your trust levels are, and how certainly that can be leveraged by local and state communicators, and you can narrow the distance as far as the federal government's concerned. I mean, you almost have to look at your agency like a client, and what would you do to improve the reputation of your client, and then within the means and resources you have, start to do that. So I want to get into some more of the tactical stuff, but I think a big part of it's going to be understanding this evolution. Is it getting worse? The trust, is it getting better? What's the overhang from the election? We'll probably probe some more into social media. We asked this time about AI and whether or not people should use it or not, and got a pretty interesting response to that.
I want to talk to you about that. That's one of my questions about AI. Yeah. I just did a very big interview with a PR firm out of New York where they've integrated AI into their entire firm, and they actually created a press release writing guide that sits over ChatGPT, and it helps them walk through the whole process of writing a really good press release. But that study those questions you guys asked them, and you said 62% of government comms and 76% of private comms see value in it. Where do you see the implications for comms professionals with AI? Where's the benefit? Scott, go ahead.
I want to jump in on this because this has been my soapbox for the last about 2 years, and Larry knows it. And we saw it in the results from the public, right? That there is a distrust in communications generated by AI. And that's because you are separating the message from the person. The message is seen as artificial if there was an AI component used in developing it. And I would point this particularly to those spots where you have a leader who needs to come forward and produce that empathy statement to connect with their community after whatever level of emergency or tragedy there is. as soon as somebody, learns that that empathy statement was generated by AI, like all of the authenticity is out the window. And authenticity is the coin of the realm when you're coming to empathy statements and connecting, a leader to their audience.
Right, right.
And so that is the biggest threat to credibility in communications, that if we are going to use these tools, we need to be open about the use of those tools, and we need to be selective about where we are using those tools, right?
I agree. You have to be strategic about it. You do need to be upfront about it, because I think people also equate AI with all the bots and stuff that happened during the last election cycle. So, and that's always a concern, because since people are using social media much more to get their news and to get their information, that becomes a major concern. So I could see that. Larry?
I think part of the problem is that people aren't aware how much AI is a part of their life already. I mean, if you put on GPS in your car, you're using AI. So part of it is that people there's this fear. You can separate, content. If you're talking about press releases and statements and articles and research papers, that maybe you have somebody do. Chat GPT does a quick analysis, and then you take that and turn it into something that's legitimate and authentic. That's a time saver. And that may address the issue of timeliness. And it's also not particularly expensive compared to, a lot of other things. So I think part of it is people, I think that what they're reacting to is data mining and identity issues. And we're not talking about that, but I think AI as a concept is scaring people. And they haven't really thought through what it might mean and how they're using it already. And it may be a question of using it strategically, disclosing it when you do, and producing better results in a more timely fashion, and leave the other stuff out, because the drama that it creates, I think it's
and I think there's definitely a place for it in helping and making people more efficient. I think as a standalone public information officer for a public sector agency, having that efficiency and being able to rapidly create a statement and make sure that that's been vetted properly, or just doing your research on a topic and getting the information quickly, where before you'd have to go through and you'd spend all that time reading to come up with one line that you would use in a press release.
Right.
So there's definitely some efficiency needs in there, and I see the benefits of it, but I think most people are just so afraid of, it's another tool for the government to lie to me.
Right. And that goes right to the heart of the study, which is trust in government. If people see that this is just another manufactured message coming out of a computer, they don't have a connection that this is actually, what the people in charge are going to be doing. And, at the ground level, you're starting at a deficit. Robert, the other thing, to get back to your earlier question, which was, what do we see, like going forward here? The other piece that I'm really interested in seeing, now that we kind of got some baseline understanding and data to build off of, is what people are seeing that is having a positive impact on their perceptions, right?
What's working? Yeah.
What's working? If we can unearth some of those, diamonds, in the muck, here, we can point folks to some spaces that go, when you're doing these kinds of things, this is the way that you earn back trust. This is the way that you close that gap. And I believe that will be, a great help to folks in our profession.
Yeah, I think if we can identify some best practices that are readily can be replicated at any level of government, just like you would do in the private sector, it makes all the sense in the world. It's just it'll be tricky how to do that, but I do think it's possible through interviews or verbatims, or maybe Scott will do some follow-up focus groups to pull from people. That's another possibility. But I think what's exciting for us is that this wasn't being done. We're learning more about it, and we're really giving the discipline of government communications its due. And as we get better and better at this research and then find things we can, nuggets or diamonds, as Scott put it, that we can share, people will net benefit and more people will participate. So it should be self-fulfilling. That's my hope.
As a thought about the U.S. adults and the way that they perceive the public messaging, one of the issues like self-serving interests, is it possible that the public they have a difficulty in discerning the difference between a politician speaking about a political event or activity or whatever it might be, or political issue, and not about an incident that occurred and the facts of that incident?
100%. I think that blend those lines are very blurred right now. Part of that is a natural evolution, and part of that is deliberate on the part of certain individuals who've made platforms out of provision of basic services, healthcare, etc., immigration, all the hot button issues of our time. And I think it's a disservice to the public because they don't know who to go to for the straight scoop. They used to be able to get information from the government, and there's even within government communicators different levels of and different types of trust. So it's a very interesting topic the more we look into it. But I do think you're right. I think people can't separate political communication from government communications, public information, public service, and self-service, if you will, to promote myself as a candidate the next time around.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Scott.
100%. In complete agreement. I think that one of the early opportunities that we've started to identify through some of the results here is that the agencies and organizations within government that are delivering consistently on what they say they're going to do and show the public that they're doing it, are actually finding themselves in a much better situation than others. That tends to be happening at the local level a lot more than in other places. So there's a difference in where you stand on how your public is viewing you when you drill down into it. But when the question is asked, at the broadest terms, all of those trouble spots that Larry just described come cascading down on everybody being wrapped into the same boat, and the worst offenders give the impression for everybody at that point.
I go back to the Walter Cronkite era of news media. You think about that Walter Cronkite was the epitome of honesty on the news, and if Walter Cronkite said it, it was fact. And now there's not one news person I can say that I would say guaranteed that I would trust 100% of what they're saying, because we've had very influential news media members that we found have basically lied about experiences and background, and both in the print and the television news media, that just destroy your trust in their brand, I guess you would say.
Yeah, 100%. There's the trust in the media was, we asked that question, and it's down significantly. Then you have to ask yourself the question, how can we create trust? Maybe we have to do it ourselves, not rely on the media for that.
Yeah, for the media, the piece that I have watched happen and has been one of the biggest changes over the past 10, maybe even 20 years, is that as you've had the evolution of the 24-hour news cycle through nonstop broadcast news networks, you've seen, to fill all of that space, a huge increase in the number of shows that are really an hour-long editorial. It's not news. These are personalities who are there offering, not just a stream of their opinion, but it's all packaged in the same dressings that the news programming is. I remember when you would have any kind of editorial or commentary it during the news hour, it came with a chyron across the bottom of the screen in big capital letters saying commentary, or editorial. This is, the network offering up its opinion. But today, you will shift from 1 hour of the news into, the next hour of, moderated, panel discussion where it is nothing but unfiltered opinion. And there's no difference, that's discernible to the viewer in terms of the set or the packaging or anything like
Right.
that. And the blurring of that line, has eroded confidence, because nobody knows whether you're sharing an opinion or whether you're sharing, here's what happened.
Okay. So to just sum this up so I understand the study, that one of the big takeaways from this study is, number one, government's decisions are believed to be mostly based on political rather than the public interest, and that's according to 70% of U.S. adults. And government messaging is seen as ineffective and untrustworthy by 62% of U.S. adults.
Correct. So we've got some work to do.
Yeah, and we all do. God, we all do it, absolutely. So you guys are going to be working on, for the next year, you're going to be working on that, how to build that public trust, right? That's what you're going to be working on. And
the object of this is to identify the issues, and then working with NAGC and our own work here at GW, start to create opportunities to help communicators be more effective through training and overview stuff, best practices, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not enough to point out there's a problem. We'd like to be part of the solution as well, and that's why we teamed up with NAGC to move forward.
And
Robert,
this is great stuff, guys.
I think it's pretty clear that we've made blatantly clear that you can't say, "Hey, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help," and
Not
just
good
have
enough.
have the carte blanche, of being accepted and trusted. We have to know that we go into these conversations essentially with our communities, where we have to demonstrate at every turn, here's what we're saying, here's where we're getting it from. We have to be really clear about what we are pointing to that is factual information. We have to be very clear about what is best practice. Here is, hey, this is what our experts, are recommending based on their experience. And here's what we're asking you to do. But just like the media, needs to label, its opinions and and its facts, we need to do the same thing, and be really clear about what we are sharing with folks in order to address some of this gap. I mean, those are some of the things that are very clear even early on in these results.
Right. Gentlemen, is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
I think the biggest question I have in my mind, and you've kind of alluded to it, is where do we go from here? We identify there's an issue, there's a gap. We recognize that there are factors beyond our control, like polarization in general in American society. And then the question really is, okay, understanding all that, now we know the problem, what's the solution? And I think that's really where we want to move in year 3 on a going forward basis, is let's start talking about solutions and things you can do that will make it better, notwithstanding the fact that there are things at 30,000 feet you can't control, but you can control ground level stuff. I think there's a tendency for all of us being human beings, when it gets hard, we say, well, nobody trusts us anyway, and you just fall into a pattern. And we're saying it's time to move past that. And we'd like to help you and work with NAGC to do that.
Robert, I agree 100% with Larry on this. And I think that the danger for some folks would be to look at these results and go, oh, is me, and I'm never going to be able to make any difference here. It's too important.
Yes.
It's too important, because the better we function as communicators, the better our government operates, better our public, is able to make the decisions that they need to make, as we move forward. And so this is something that we cannot just throw our hands up in the air and say that, well, there's nothing I can do about it. We have to dedicate ourselves as government communicators to making a positive change in this area so that we can get back to a space where, we are delivering actionable information to our publics and they are willing to look at that, think about it, and make good decisions for themselves and their communities.
Excellent.
Correct.
All right, let's go to some rapid fire questions, guys. Simple questions, easy answers, right? Ready? Texting or talking?
Yep. Talking.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Adult drink of choice?
Jack Daniels.
Fat Tire beer.
Guilty pleasure food?
Popcorn.
Ooh, really good mac and cheese.
Coffee or tea?
Ooh, okay. Coffee.
Tea.
There you go. Look at that.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Time travel.
Ooh, that's a good one. Flight.
Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Beg for forgiveness.
Both.
I'm married 49 years. It's worked so well.
There you go. The PIO way, though. Place you guys would most like to travel to?
Australia.
My bucket list trip right now is a cruise around South America that stops in Antarctica.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Excellent. Gentlemen, let's sum this up there. What key points would you like our listeners to take from this? And then where could they find the study?
The study's available at our website at GWU. You can just go to GWU/GSPM/strategic public relations. I know it's a lot of work. Just look up GPA study on the GWU site and you'll find it. GPA as in government and public affairs, or funnily, grade point average. Easy to remember.
I'll put the
that's
link.
how you can get it.
I'll put the link in the show notes. It'll be easy to find it.
Thank you. As far as the takeaway is concerned, I think we've hit on it. We recognize there's a problem. We know what the work is too important because public service and the public depends upon us. So let's move forward. Let's not sit around and say, woe is me. It's not my fault. It's polarization, because then you're not doing your job. You're not serving the public. And that's why you're there in the first place.
Again, like I'm right there with Larry on this. And the other piece that I hope folks can take away from this as we move forward is to get energized about the opportunity that is ahead to make a positive difference in this area. It's like, yep, there's a gap. Mind the gap, on this issue. But that's our first step. Okay. Now we have to reclaim that ground. And as professionals in public communications on behalf of government agencies, it's our job to make that get better. And I'm dedicated to doing that. And I hope that all of my colleagues across the profession will do the same thing.
Absolutely.
How can people best reach out to you if they want to connect or follow up on anything they heard today?
They can reach me on LinkedIn, Lawrence J. Parnell. That's probably where I post a lot of stuff. Pretty active there. Or my email address is lparnell@gwu.edu, George Washington University.edu.
Likewise, LinkedIn is a great place to connect. Also, if they want to reach out to me, through email, it's firstname.lastname@ventura.org.
And I will add all that into the show notes. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the show, and interesting discussion. I will have to come back and re-interview you guys to see what your findings come out with for next year.
Sounds great. We'll look forward to it.
Great. Guys, thank you very much. Appreciate it, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Good seeing you,
Thank you
Scott.
for having us.
Bye.